MacLachlan, professor of philosophy at York University. We've heard this referred to as the culture of shut up. Do you think that's an apt description of the kinds of divisions we're seeing nowadays?
If you shut the fuck up and let me read my list, there's the fucking proof.
Absolutely not. There are lots of things that contribute to a culture of shut up.
So, number one, shut the fuck up for a sec.
The end of net neutrality contributes to a culture of shut up. Government silencing of scientists contributes to a culture of shut up. State surveillance of private correspondence contributes to a culture of shut up. Students protesting controversial speakers, that's an example of free speech. It's not the end of free speech.
He also, one of his famous quotes, he called date rape exciting, which is just horrible and misogynistic. There's nothing exciting or fun about rape. Rape is horrible, and we don't tolerate that sort of thought at U of T.
Short clip, they were talking about this must be a rape apologist, and I had written a book called The Myth of Male Power, and in that book I did a chapter on the politics of rape and rape prevention. And I took on the phrase that was being used a lot at that time and is still being used a lot, which is, what is there about the word no that you don't understand? And of course there's nothing per se about it, but I talked about the fact that if I were a woman or have as a parent of two daughters, I want to make sure that my daughter really knows how to prevent rape, and if she is, and that there's lots of things that we do in communication. One of the things we do is our verbal nose. Another thing we do is our tone of voice. Another is our body language. Another is the clothes we wear. Another is the situations in which we get ourselves into. And so by taking on the multiplicity of factors that it takes to make sure a daughter of mine or anyone's daughter is safe, I challenge the simplicity of what is there about no you don't understand. That if a woman is saying no with her verbal language and yes with her body language, that does send a mixed message, and she's much more likely to be vulnerable. And so that made me a rape apologist and led to the protest against basically the Myth of Male Power book that I wrote some 20 years ago, which I stand by all of that, so I'm not apologizing for that book at all. So when men earn money, feminists, rather than seeing it as men contributing to the family and contributing to love and their children's opportunities, they saw it as privilege and power. And that's a fundamental difference that I challenge in the Myth of Male Power. And that's core to why the feminists, some feminists, many feminists actually see that, especially young feminists today, see that and appreciate what their fathers contributed. But others, like the Socialist Worker Party feminists that were behind the protest at the University of Toronto that you just saw, those feminists do not appreciate that.
Okay. I came as part of my women's studies.
We're not super interested in talking to you, first of all, but basically we're here to shut down an event.
Very frustrated. I was studying all today, and I took time out of my studies to come here.
Would you like to ask him why he's here?
I'm not sufficiently convinced that I'll receive an answer that isn't what I presented.
Two of my friends committed suicide, and I want the peace of understanding why that happened.
Wow. When did this happen?
It happened about 2 years ago. It was one after the other like that.
Did you expect to get some addressing of suicide issue at the talk here?
Yes, I did.
What I have to ask on that, and I'll ask you, is why this space to talk about that? Like feminism, for example, offers lots of spaces to talk about mental health issues, talk about depression, both in men, women, and people who don't identify within the binary.
I think everybody's voice should be heard. I wondered why the security was trying to keep me back, and I think it's for my own safety.
Yes, in the Myth of Male Power, I challenged both the concept of power, that men have the power. Basically, I said power needs to be defined as control over your own life. And historically speaking, there wasn't a group of people called a patriarchy that were all males who tried to make rules to benefit men at the expense of women, which is what the women's studies departments would all agree with me. They would agree with that definition of what they say. And so I was saying that in fact it was far more complex, that the dominating force in the world was not the patriarchy, but it was the need to survive.
Rape apologist, incest supporting, woman hating fucking scum. there someone else that can wait? Does she want to follow me?
Fucking scum. Yeah, just another...
I just want to listen to someone else's opinion. I'm not even on a side here. I just listen to as many people as I can.
You know what? So I was only recently made familiar with Janice's experiences. I had the chance to watch them on YouTube. And what I saw warmed me. I saw people...
What I've experienced as a student here at the University of Ottawa myself as an alumni. During my studies here at the University of we'll take a moment.
So I was only recently made familiar with Janice's experiences. I had the chance to watch them on YouTube. And what I saw warmed me. I saw people...
Until we enforce the quorum in the room. So we'll take a pause.
Is there a proctologist in the house?
Can you not call security?
Or a proctologist, either one would do it.
Let's call security.
So I was only recently made familiar with Janice's experiences. I had the chance to watch them on YouTube. And what I saw warmed me. I saw people...
Right now, I'm at the University of Ottawa. This is the place where they shut down Ann Coulter by pulling the fire alarm. Well, our friend Janice Fiamengo experienced a similar problem. She was shut down last Friday. Check it out.
Okay, you know, it's the signature of a totalitarian ideology to attempt to quash dissent. So every time you interrupt, you're merely showing your repressive tendencies. You're not showing anything about your virtue. Okay, let's forget it. There's no point. So you think this is a victory? Yeah, why are you so frightened of hearing an opinion different from your own? You're pathetic.
Janice Fiamengo joins me now in her office. And Janice, was it just disappointing that this happened yet again? Attempt to have a meaningful discussion shut down at university, or is this just par for the course?
Unfortunately, it does seem to be par for the course now. I was disappointed, but I also felt that at least it made my point that I was trying to make at Queen's and at the University of Ottawa, that unfortunately on campus today it isn't possible to discuss a whole range of subjects because there is this very vocal minority of hardcore radical students who don't believe in free speech.
Now, when I was looking at going to university, maybe I was just foolish, I was idealistic. I thought, well, this is where you go to debate ideas. This is where you go to think big, to have your thoughts challenged, to challenge others. And is it campus-wide? Is it just within certain faculties? Does it just happen for talks like yours that are outside of the classroom?
Well, I think that it happens particularly for a number, it's campus-wide, I would say, and that it happens on a number of key issues. If you want to discuss abortion from a pro-life position, if you're pro-Israel, if you want to talk about Islam in ways that are politically incorrect, and now if you want to talk about men's issues in a way outside of the feminist framework of the evil patriarchy, someone is going to claim that you are a proponent of hate, and or that you're in some way suppressing women's rights, and that therefore you do not have any right to speak at all.
And
Thank you.
Anything, y'all are being oppressed by capitalism, and like our common enemy is capitalism.
Well, why don't people find out?
Not this guy, he's a boss.
Why don't you find out what... Oh, wait a minute, it makes sense now. Now I know why you have Kim Jong-un's haircut.
Oh, yeah, I would love to jump in. Thank you. Well, I think it's important to talk about what we mean by free speech. I care a lot about free speech. I teach John Stuart Mill. I'm committed to philosophy. We started because Socrates was silenced. Free speech means freedom from government interference and sanction. It doesn't mean freedom from consequences, and these consequences can include vigorous reactions, criticisms, protests. Unfortunately, it can even mean that the debate doesn't happen or doesn't go the way you'd want it to. I think sometimes
consequences, if I may get in here, because I was at the exit after pulling the fire alarm.
No mainstream feminist, including me, none of us are ever going to defend the pulling of a fire alarm.
If you can point
to a single mainstream feminist thinker or defender who wants to defend the idea of using fire alarms to shut people down, I will personally apologize to them for them. I might add that many of Professor Fiamango's talks start by characterizing a whole swath of our colleagues as intellectually empty, incoherent, and dishonest. This is exactly the sort of conversation move that's designed to provoke a fierce, angry, or laughing response. I'm with Rachel on this. If you set out to say things designed to offend and harm people, you can't complain that your free speech is being violated when people respond with offense, anger, and protest.
Is that what you're doing?
I would certainly never
need a platform to speak. It doesn't mean you get to speak all the time. It doesn't mean that public universities necessarily have to make a place for you, or that if students at those universities want to protest you being given a platform to expound ideas they find harmful, offensive, insulting to their experiences, that they don't have the right to object to that.
Come on back on
in whatever means they have.
Keep doing this. Keep harassing people at these events.
Let's let Alice back in.
Protesting and keep speaking. I think we have to be very careful not to confuse criticism with control. So you're suggesting you're perfectly open to criticism as long as you get to control the manner in which it happens, the forum in which it happens, and so on. These students were using the forums available to them, street protest, which is one of the most fundamental aspects of freedom of speech. They were using every venue possible to them to debate vigorously exactly the ideas and concepts that profess. There was absolutely debate. I witnessed it.
You know, it's the signature. It's the signature of a totalitarian ideology to attempt to quash dissent. So every time you interrupt, you're merely showing your repressive tendencies. You're not showing anything about your virtue. Okay, let's forget it.
The floor, namely vigorous, angry, occasionally less than polite protest. And I think we have to think carefully about why we're questioning a culture of shut up. Has shut up just entered the stage, or is shut up being lobbied at people who aren't?
The fire alarm then goes off and the feminists cheer like banshees, ecstatic that they've used bully tactics to silence the opposing point of view.
Well, I would certainly like to ask you how you would feel if you were giving a talk and you were shut down by a group of protesters. Would you say this was a wonderful example of freedom of speech if you never got to say your first sentence?
I would certainly not frame it in terms of freedom of speech. How I would feel is I would feel shocked if that led to a much wider platform for my views, including an entire episode of The Agenda being dedicated to them. I'd probably be pretty pleased about the whole thing, and I suspect that's the case for you as well.
If every time you tried to speak after that, students decided that you shouldn't be allowed to speak, and so that people who
misogynist, and they said you promoted incest and all sorts of things like that.
Well, for one thing, what I might do is think about some of the claims I'm making, including that all of my colleagues in women's studies are intellectually empty and dishonest, that feminists don't care about...
I never said that. I said that women's studies as a discipline was intellectually empty and dishonest.
In it. And so I might think about that. I might think about the claim that feminists don't think about men's suffering.
One at a time, please, one at a time.
So you asked me how I would feel. I would feel shocked and I would feel hurt, and that would be part of the reaction that the people were going through, because one of the things that being shocked and hurt and facing the consequences of free speech does is force you to confront the consequences of what you're saying. You are making a vast array of claims about rape victims, about feminists, about women, about those who disagree with you, that are often specious arguments based on...
How do you think, or what effect do you think this dialogue of children need their father, children need their father, what effect do you think that this dialogue is going to have on particularly lesbian couples who want to have children?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, but I suppose it creates a challenge for
heteronormativity.
Yeah,
is what it does.
There's been a great deal of research that has actually shown that children do better with a mother and a father. So, I mean, if that's
Absolutely atrocious, and it is not true.
Empirically true.
Back it up. I want a citation. I want a citation right now.
Back it up.
So we've got
Show me
time
where
for
you
4
saw
more
the
questions,
study.
please. We've only got so much longer in the... We've got time for 4 more questions. Please keep them to 45 seconds. We're not allowed to be rigorous.
Very little evidence, or are twisted to be provocative. And I think that perhaps a productive use of your conversation in the protest would be to rethink some of what you're saying.
Well, that's what you would like me to do.
Well, you
but
asked me how I would feel.
Isn't that an example of controlling too? I mean,
no, it's not controlling,
if you start to say that blowing a horn and beating on drums is a productive way of engaging with a speaker with whom you disagree, then I'm not sure what role you think that intellectual exchange has at a university. If university is not about the place where we work through ideas in a rational way, not through emotion, not through shouting, not through accusations, where you challenge what you believe to be false with evidence. If you don't believe that, then what is the university for?
I absolutely believe that.
Example of the way.
There isn't always a clear distinction between ideas and people. It wasn't ideas who rushed the stage. It was people who were directly hurt by the effect of this program. And the examples that Justin and Janice have both alluded to, they're talking about ideas shouldn't have rights. We're concerned with people protecting ideas. But Donald Sterling wasn't presenting a view about ideas. He was insulting people. The people who used racist slurs and blackface against a hockey player weren't insulting ideas or expressing ideas. They were hurting a person. And if you are a rape apologist, you deny a rape culture, you say that victims of rape are responsible by their conduct or their dress or so on, you are hurting people. So you're not just making people uncomfortable. You're not just challenging their view. You're not just opening up a provocative statement that might lead to an interesting conversation. You are silencing them by telling them they don't matter, they don't have value, they don't have the same place at the table that you do. There isn't a place at the table for them. And throughout history, the most powerful and brave response to the kind of message that says you're not valuable, you're not smart, you don't belong here, is for people to use every means possible to express the counter view, which is, I belong, I have a right to speak.
Okay,
that isn't always pretty, it isn't always polite.